welcome. Welcome back. Part 2. Nice to see you all again. You had a nice summer. I guess as it is a new term, perhaps we could start with the Praise to Shakyamuni Buddha on page 5.
Hopefully that will now be coming through. Okay. To the Founder, the Endowed Transcendent Destroyer, the One Gone Beyond, the Foe Destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings and go for refuge. To the Founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the One Gone Beyond, the Foe Destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings and go for refuge. To the Founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the One Gone Beyond, the Foe Destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings and go for refuge. When, O Supreme amongst humans, you were born on this earth, you paced out 7 strides, then said, I am supreme in this world. To you, who were wise then, I prostrate. With pure bodies, form supremely pure, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, Lord, to you I prostrate. With the supreme signs, face like spotless moon, colour like gold, to you I prostrate. Dust free like you, the 3 worlds are not. Incomparably wise one, to you I prostrate. The Saviour having great compassion, the Founder having all understanding, the field of merit with qualities like a vast ocean, to you, the one gone to thusness, I prostrate. The purity that frees one from attachment, the virtue that frees one from the lower realms, the one path, the sublime pure reality, to the Dharma that pacifies, I prostrate. Those who are liberated and who also show the path to liberation, the holy field qualified with the realizations, who are devoted to the moral precepts, to you, the sublime community intending virtue, I prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all 3 ever devout homage. To all worthy of respect, bowing with bodies as many as all realms atoms in all aspects, with supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions, subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a mirage, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning or a cloud, see conditioned things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all-seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness and death. So, of course, we should have begun with visualizing Shakyamuni Buddha, but if you haven't already done that, do that now. and strongly think Shakyamuni Buddha, who is the same in nature as my root guru, same mind, no distinction, is actually present in front of me right now. About to turn the wheel of the Mahayana Dharma for the first time, delivering this profound teaching on the perfection of wisdom. The Buddha is seated in profound meditation. The sutra is spoken by the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara and the Arhat Shariputra, but their words are inspired by the Buddha's meditation. Therefore, the Buddha is cited as the author of the sutra. So try to imagine how it might feel if you're one of the Bodhisattva disciples of the Buddha, seated expectantly, waiting for him to deliver this discourse, in which is contained the whole meaning of the Bodhisattva path, the whole path to perfect enlightenment, being spoken for the first time in this world. And we'll recite together. Thus did I hear at one time. The Bhagavan was dwelling on Mass of Vultures Mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also, at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom, and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of the Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara: how should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Sharadvatiputra: Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form, form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odour, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element, and so on, up to and including no mind element and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the end point of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly, completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared. Tayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhi Soha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage. It is like that. It is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom just as you have indicated, even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagavan having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharadvatiputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagavan. So just refresh your visualization of Guru Shakyamuni Buddha. Concentrating on the thought that although not present in a gross physical body, there's no doubt that, as he himself declared, when one thinks of him, calls him to mind, with a mind of faith, he is present. Even though it may be difficult to generate a strong conviction at the moment, through repeated practice like this, one can do so. And the effect then is as if one is receiving teachings directly from the Buddha. And receiving the blessings from him in person. So with that thought of the Buddha being vividly present before you, spend a few minutes recalling the teachings on taking refuge in the three jewels and on bodhicitta. In fact, although we practice these separately in terms of the Mahayana path, to take complete Mahayana refuge is to generate the mind of bodhicitta. To take refuge in the Mahayana path is to turn one's mind in the direction of following that path purely. And this, of course, is the path of the Bodhisattva. Even though we may have thoughts of not being worthy, perhaps, or we think this is something too high for us, this is not the case. It's simply that we are on a very early stage of that path. So we can generate tremendous joy that we are entering the path of the Bodhisattva. Our destination is Buddhahood. And through that attainment, we'll be able to free all sentient beings from suffering and bring them to perfect peace and bliss. as we recite the prayer, we can think we are requesting the help and the blessings of the Gurus and the Buddhas. With their help, without question, we can travel and complete this Bodhisattva path. So we recite the prayer, page 20. Om Sangye Chedang Soki Chonam La Jang Chupa Du Dagni Kyab Suche Dagi Chen Gi Pe Sonam Gi Chola Penche Sangye Rukpa Sho Sangye Chedang Soki Chonam La Jang Chupa Du Dagni Kyab Suche Dagi Chen Gi Pe Sonam Gi Chola Penche Sangye Rukpa Sho Sangye Chedang Soki Chonam La Jang Chupa Du Dagni Kyab Suche Dagi Chen Gi Pe Sonam Gi Chola Penche Sangye Rukpa Sho. So your Guru, who is none other than Shakyamuni Buddha, is extremely pleased with your having generated the minds of refuge and bodhicitta. In order to bless your mind, the throne, the lotus, sun and moon, disk absorb into him. He comes towards you, becoming smaller, turns round, and comes to rest on the crown of your head. So again, strongly feel his presence there. Your Guru's sole purpose is to bring you and all sentient beings to enlightenment, to free you from all suffering, bring you into perfect peace and bliss, out of pure love and compassion. So feel the blessings of that mind of perfect compassion and wisdom, inseparably mixed. Guru Shakyamuni Buddha dissolves into golden light and nectar, which descends through the crown of your head, pervading your whole body, blessing and purifying your 5 aggregates, your 3 doors, your body, speech and mind. All impurities of body, speech and mind are dissolved into emptiness. Your mind becomes mixed inseparably with Guru Shakyamuni Buddha's holy mind. Mind that is in the nature of pure unconditional love and compassion, fully aware of the empty nature of all phenomena. Let your mind absorb into the space of emptiness. Not nothingness, but a sense of total clarity, transparency, no substantiality, no concrete existence, no heaviness, just purity, clarity, and vastness. And rest in that space for a few moments. And slowly relax your concentration. Bring the meditation to an end.
Too hot, David, and I won't be able to sustain my concentration. Humid.
Yeah, is anyone familiar with the air conditioning? I'd like to just turn it on for a bit.
We can have a go, can't we?
Yeah.
Do you want me to have a look at it, David?
Yeah. You basically just...
It'll get cooler, it'll get warmer.
Yeah, there's a sort of up and down, plus and minus. It's on there, just behind the Buddha image there. That's it, yeah. And you'll see, I think basically once it's on, you just turn the temperature down a little bit. I think this is our minus button.
We're on 18, that's the coolest it'll go. 20 odd outside. So
And it's just coming on, isn't it?
Yeah, just it'll be fine.
Is it coming on now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So that should cool it down a bit. If it's not enough, we can open the, we can kind of get through passage of air through the doors and windows.
Sounds exciting.
Okay, sorry about but at least we did it after the meditation, so that's all right. Hopefully, we'll do a meditation at the end, but hopefully it'll be cool enough by then. We won't need it.
Cold down on this.
Yeah, very good. Okay, so have a little check-in time. See how you're doing. So I don't recall clearly, but I know I did. For those of you who were here last term, those of you who weren't, that's not doesn't apply. So no need to worry. But I think I said something about perhaps practicing a little bit with some of these meditations on the initial scope of the Lam Rim. So basically, looking at impermanence. Suffering and karma, precious human rebirth, these meditations that are sort of structured around looking beyond the confines of this one life and seeing, becoming, should we say, beginning to relate more strongly to the future consequences of how we live this life in terms of the next life, is really the, those four meditations: precious human rebirth, death and impermanence, suffering, the law of cause and effect, karma, is all different aspects of that, isn't it? And taking refuge as well, because refuge is what protects you from a lower rebirth. So these are very important meditations. We cannot succeed in the higher levels of the middle scope and the higher scope. So the path of the Arhat and the path of the Bodhisattva cannot be successfully practiced if we don't have that grounding in this basic awareness of what we need to do to protect ourselves from a suffering rebirth. That's like the foundational level. So I don't know, have any of you been following up on that suggestion or have you been doing other quite equally beneficial things, I'm sure? Anyone like to offer some thoughts on that? Or on whatever it is that you have been doing, that's equally fine. But I like to sort of get some sense of what people's experience is, because I can talk away and leave you to get on with it, but I do want it feels important.
Going beyond middle, we can't reach the higher meditations unless we're going beyond.
What I said was that there's these three scopes within the Lam Rim. There's three parts to it. The first part, called the initial scope, or sometimes called the lowest scope, perhaps misleading, is the practices that we need to do to ensure that we don't fall into a suffering rebirth as an animal or a ghost, a hungry ghost or a hell being in the next life. That we at least are able to have another human rebirth where we're able to continue practicing the Dharma. This is the initial scope. The middle scope is what I think most people are familiar with as the motivation. This is all in terms of the motivation, right? So that's the motivation for the first one. The middle one, the motivation is to free ourselves from suffering, once and for all.
Yes.
That is the attainment of nirvana. That is only the middle scope. The great scope, the highest scope, which is exclusive to Mahayana practice, is the motivation to attain the highest possible state of enlightenment purely out of compassion for others, purely out of the wish to gain the ability to free all beings from suffering. That is the Mahayana, and that is where we are aiming at. Okay, so all of these practices we do within the Lam Rim. We don't do the first scope practices and second scope practices for the sake of that motivation. We do them all for the sake of the Bodhisattva motivation. But we need to practice those two levels first. We need to practice the first level before we can practice the second. We need to practice the second level before we can practice the third. Okay?
So the only way I can answer your question is quite honestly and vaguely, because I thought this was the start of the course, but it isn't. So I'll come from week one and do it all. But from a quite intuitive level, what I do know, I mean, all that you said made sense as usual. Yeah. More or less. But from an intuitive look back at the last 17 years of practice, I know the path is partly individual. And I know it's progressive, and this is new to me, what you've outlined, but intellectually it makes sense. I'll reflect on it, and I'll start to practice. I'll read more about it, and I'll come to the next from week one. But even on a vague intuitive level, barriers that were there are just gone. not entirely, but I can appreciate what you're saying, not just intellectually, because I've
Good.
read your things, and I'll apply myself
Yeah.
on to week one, but I think the path is partly individual, and you have to. If you get confused, maybe sometimes you need specific advice from a teacher.
Well, that of course is true, and of course if I'm giving a talk to a number of people I have to speak in generalities, so but thank you, Milan, for that question. I hope that's clarified that a bit, and what I'm kind of fishing for is a little bit from people's personal experience. So has anybody got anything to offer? Yeah.
Interesting experience at the weekend. Whether it's relevant to this or not, I don't know, but I'll tell you, this is the only place you could say it out loud. So.
Okay.
But I was listening to Power of Now, who was the chap
Yeah.
you was.
Eckhart Tolle, yeah.
Yeah, and do you know when you listen to it, and just for some reason in that moment, it kind of really is quite
Okay.
sits with you.
Yeah.
He was talking about that moment, I guess, when we die. There's this,
Yeah.
that moment where it's your chance, isn't it?
Yes.
To do the right
Very
state
true,
of
yeah.
mind and you do the right thing.
Yeah, yeah.
It could be that enlightenment moment.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
found myself feeling quite excited about the
Good.
being able
That's
to,
good.
We're getting ready for that, isn't it? And
Yeah, yeah.
what an opportunity.
Dead right, Dawn, yeah. Yeah.
Which was quite odd because I was listening to
Different perspective on it, isn't it?
Yeah, I was
Very
listening
different.
to it in the car, and I just sort of got amongst my friends and thought, well, I can't really say. It's been quite an exciting drive up, and I'm quite looking forward to dying because there's that. Yeah, but I realise I'm not ready, David.
Sure.
Because it's, you know,
Yeah. Yeah, we all have a lot of work to do.
one chance and then you've another lifetime, and you might not.
That's
meet it then.
that's the heart of the message, Dawn,
Yeah.
absolutely, you know, is that, and that's why, you know, sometimes when you hear, I remember, you know, David Lascelles made a film in the 1970s called Tibet, a Buddhist Trilogy, and in that there's a Lama who's giving a teaching like the way they teach the Tibetans, and it's a bit different. And I mean, it was scary, you know, he's talking about death awareness, and that's why they do it. They really lay it on heavy, because it's like you say, you know, there's just that one chance.
But it's
And we don't know what state our mind's going to be in at that moment.
It's
The more we
different.
prepare,
Rather than grasping on to right that this lifetime's going, but seeing
Yeah.
it as the right. This is
it's
that
a
moment
complete
we've got to
reversal,
get
isn't
right.
it?
Yeah,
Completely turns it around.
yeah. And I've listened to that
Yeah.
book before,
Yeah,
but for some reason that just stood out to me.
very good, Dawn, yeah.
It's the Tolle book.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
What's it called?
Power of Now, isn't
Oh,
it?
I've read
Power
it.
of Now, yeah.
Yeah, and it's quite a nice read, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's an excellent book, yeah.
And
He's a very interesting teacher, yeah. More than interesting, actually, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I found that quite motivational.
Yeah, yeah.
What I will do
Good.
with that motivation, I suppose.
Spot on, Dawn, yeah. I mean, that's exactly the message. Yeah, very good. Let's all think about
So
that.
it's a rigorous, frightening message.
Yeah.
I didn't quite hear it. This one life now is
Not even just this one life. I think what Dawn was referring to, the moment when we die,
yeah. Ah,
that is a moment of
We get a little window,
Opportuni-
don't we?
enlightenment opportunity.
it is the state of that your mind is in and what your mind is focused on at the moment when you die that determines what's going to happen from that point onwards, how your existence unfolds into the next state of existence, right?
So when we see that light, we've got to
Yeah.
get it right.
That's right. And the only way is through the power of familiarity. You know, so this Tibetan word for meditation, gom, means to familiarize, to become, by repeatedly thinking about these topics. That's why we do them. You know, then the chances are that's what you'll be thinking about at that moment. If, you know, you're thinking about where the Leeds is going to get relegated, you know, that's what you'll be thinking about at that moment, and that may not get you anyway. You know what I mean? So that's it.
I had
Yeah.
a near-death experience, like
Yeah.
only
That can be helpful. Yeah.
Well, it gave me faith in enlightenment and in
Good.
particular Buddhism.
Yeah. And that's a very common.
Because it is, and well, what was shocking, and it was a weird experience, but in brief, it was actually quite pleasurable because it wasn't my time to go.
Right, yeah.
Something came out of the crown
Yeah.
of my head like Grayskull, sat up there, floated around a bit with wordless thoughts,
Okay.
and it gave me faith, but I will look out. I'm pretty sure because of that experience, but not complacent, that when I die, I'll prepare my death in the way that the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying advises.
Yeah, well, the work of preparation is now, not then. It's now from day to day. We can't speculate about how we might be going to prepare then. We have to do the work now. That's the message.
I'm puzzled, isn't it both?
Well, in a way not, because now all you can do is now.
Okay.
You might sort of tell yourself that you're going to do something or other at the moment when you die, but if you are not between now and then doing that every day,
Yeah.
it's not particularly likely to happen.
And then
I've
might
got
be
it,
in
I've
5
got it,
minutes,
yeah.
might it?
It might be any time. So we need to do it now.
Got you. Good.
Exciting, it's an opportunity.
Yeah, that's very good, Dawn. Yeah, that's really the best possible attitude to have. Thank you. Yeah, great. Okay. So, I think maybe we'll hear from one more person. Anybody else like to chip in?
I suppose there's something I could share.
Yeah, please do.
It's just where that I handled something that happened during the summer that I don't think I'd have been able to handle in that particular way
Yes.
if I hadn't have done the course last year.
Oh, okay.
Minded to
Good.
a better state. I don't know if I bore you with the details,
No.
but I had 2 cats.
Yes.
Love these cats.
Yeah.
And Mr. Merlin, he was a big old Maine Coon cat. He wasn't even 2 years old. And he died unexpectedly at home.
Oh.
He had a fit. And he collapsed. And Sally was upstairs, now downstairs. And to cut a long story short, he had this fit, fell down the steps and died literally in front of me
Oh
in
gosh.
the hallway.
Wow.
Sally was hysterical. And I don't know why, but I was just completely overcome with this. I need to sort him in his last moments because we were taking his last breaths.
Yes.
So I literally just totally calmed him, stroked him, whispered Medicine Buddha mantras in his ear,
Wonderful.
let him pass away. It literally took him seconds. Went upstairs, got a Medicine Buddha tanker, laid it over him, and just sat with him. Now, I don't think I could have done that in that way if my mind hadn't have been as settled. I do think by doing this part of the course
Good.
earlier on,
Yeah.
it was being a mess. Because we love this cat.
Yeah. Yeah. Well done. Great. Yeah. It'd be nice, wouldn't it?
It was such a soft, loving soul. It wouldn't
Yeah,
let it fly,
yeah.
literally.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just couldn't help thinking, he's gone this soon, before he's created any negative karma for himself.
Aha.
And if you can help him on his way, God knows, you know?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think if we could understand how much difference we can make through that kind of thing, that we can make more difference at the time of death to another person than at any other time, because that's when you kind of the kind of karmic potential is very, very fluid at that time. So these mantras and practices are extremely powerful. This is why Lama Zopa, so much of what he does is to do with this. It's to do with, the practices at the time of death. He really kind of, concentrates an awful lot on that for that very reason. That's when, if at any time, that's when we can make such a huge difference in the time leading up to death, in the death process itself, and after death. Our prayers and our practices can have a huge effect on others. So that's really wonderful, Bob. Thank you.
Because it's so fluid. What's so fluid? The karmic potential.
Yeah, once we take rebirth, there's a lot of things that kind of, we're in a sort of much more fixed situation in this body. I don't want to go into a long discussion of it now, but it is kind of like at that time, as Dawn was saying, there's all these different possibilities that open up, and quite subtle influences can make a big difference. So I've had, I did quite a few funerals, because the Chinese community here, they like to have a Buddhist funeral, and there's very few people who are in Leeds who do it. And well, I can't really sort of necessarily rationalise it, but you could feel the practices that we were doing, and we could feel that it was doing something for that person who passed away. I don't know. As I say, I can't boil it down to rational scientific explanations, but intuitively you know. Yeah, exactly. It is. That's right. Yeah. If we don't have this gross physical body, or as we're approaching death, the mind is less sort of entrenched or attached to this physical body, and it's easier to affect it.
They say in the chapter in the poem now, where he's talking about that moment, as soon as we start to intellectualise what it is and what it will look like, and then it's gone. We've no connection to it anymore. It's that.
Yes.
There's a state of being, isn't it?
It is, and when
we have to make sense of it when we're talking, don't we?
Yeah, and when you're with a dying person, it's very tangible sometimes. Yeah. So, very interesting. It's more than interesting. It's very important to think about these things, and this is what the definition really actually of entering the spiritual path is, when we turn aside from just the concerns of this life to what is unfolding from this life, and how do we work with that potential. And very good. Okay, so I want to continue now with looking at now the middle scope of the Lam Rim. So Lam Rim means something like steps or stages in the path to enlightenment, in brackets. So we talked about this foundational level of the first scope, where our concern is to not fall down from the present. We're kind of in the middle, between, as the Dalai Lama said, I think, between suffering and joy, between the hell realms and nirvana. We're in the middle, which is a very, in some ways, fortunate place to be, because it's from the human state that we have the greatest potential to become enlightened. Those in the higher realms, in the Deva realms, the God realms, don't have such potential for enlightenment as we do, because things are pretty much okay up there. It feels that way, They're not really. They don't get the motivation to free themselves from suffering, because everything's pretty good for the time being, but of course only temporarily. And that's really one of the things we're going to be talking about. So yes, those practices that we do, the preliminary practices and the refuge training in refuge, are fundamentally important, and we must not neglect them, but they are not completely sufficient. We need to go beyond that as well. So this section of the text, which, just find it again, starts on, you may not have the same page reference as me actually, but this section called Training the Mind on the Common Path of the Man of Intermediate Scope of Spiritual Application, in the third Dalai Lama's text, and in the present Dalai Lama's commentary, it's the chapter called Hinayana Realism. think it's page 120 something.
123 in this one.
Very good, thank you.
It's 119 in this.
Oh, thereabouts. Okay, round about page 120.
Chapter 9.
Chapter 9, Hinayana Realism. Yeah, okay.
What was the section? I am hard of hearing.
So, I don't know if you've taken in, Melan, that we've got two texts here that we're working with. So the original one, the root text, called Essence of Refined Gold, was written by the third Dalai Lama in about the 15th century. And in that text, the section that we're looking at the moment is called Training the Mind on the Common Path of the Man of Intermediate Scope of Spiritual Application. So I'll probably just briefly explain that first of all. So when it says the common path of the man of intermediate scope, what it's referring to is that these teachings here are being given for Mahayana practitioners. They're being given for people who have actually got the higher scope of motivation, the motivation to become fully enlightened for the sake of others. But they are in common with people who have that intermediate level of motivation, who are purely motivated by the wish to become free from suffering themselves. So although that might sound selfish, might sound like it, oh, therefore it's not really Dharma. It is Dharma. It is actually a very pure spiritual motivation. So we need to kind of distinguish that from, it really isn't anything like that sort of lazy mind that just says, oh, I don't want any trouble. I don't want, don't want to have to experience any discomfort. I want to, it's not like that at all. It comes out of a profound recognition of how devastating the truth of suffering actually is. And it's a very deep realization. So this motivation to be free from suffering, and actually to be sort of more accurate, what one should say is the desire to be free from suffering and its cause. Right? Because you might want to be free from suffering. You might want somebody to wave a magic wand over you and free you from suffering. That is not what this motivation is. This motivation is usually called renunciation. So when we talk about the three principal aspects of the path, this is number one. The wish, and you have to say that it is it's I suppose that it is based on wisdom. It's based on a true understanding of what suffering is and what the cause of suffering is. So in order to become free from suffering, what we renounce is the cause of suffering. Okay, so we're not renouncing pleasure or happiness, we're renouncing the cause of suffering. Well, the cause of suffering is the three poisons, ignorance, attachment and hatred. Three causes, I suppose. The attachment and hatred, of course, they are themselves, the cause of those is ignorance. So fundamentally, it's ignorance. So to transcend these mental factors that are so familiar to us, that create suffering all the time, to have the unswerving determination to overcome those negative mental factors. That is the renunciation. So that is this intermediate scope motivation. Okay? So in order to progress, if you like, from the foundational level, the first scope, wishing to be free from lower rebirth, to this middle level, wishing to be free from all suffering, to overcome the root cause of suffering, What we fundamentally need is the realization, the understanding of the nature of suffering itself. So in terms of the first scope, it's really just the obvious form of suffering. You know, it's intense pain and you know, it's very obvious. The lower realms, the hell realm, the animal realm, and the hungry ghost realm, all of them, the suffering is incredibly obvious. There's nothing subtle about it. There's nothing subtle about even the animal realm, you know, even though some animals maybe have quite a good time part of the time. But generally speaking, in the animal realm, it's pretty obvious. It's not, you don't want to go there, right? It's more subtle when it comes to the Deva realms. I mean, they look pretty attractive at first sight, don't they? Living for millions of years, having great sort of psychic powers and beautiful body and all kinds of bliss, you know, all of these things are available. Even higher realms where, you know, more refined forms of bliss, of concentration and, you know, wonderful. But even there's still a problem. So this is probably the main topic, really. You can say that, you know, what is the content of this intermediate, this middle scope, the practices that we're doing in common with those who have that aspiration, you know, following the path of the Arhat, if you like, the Hinayana path. Essentially, it's the Four Noble Truths. That's really, you know, that's the scope of that. That's what we're looking at. Which is, you know, I mean, this is the main teaching that the Buddha gave in his life. Over and over again, he taught these Four Noble Truths. And really, if you look at the Theravada Buddhist tradition, which is half of the Buddhist world, you know, it's nothing else. But the Four Noble Truths and the Four Foundations of Mindfulness, isn't it? That's it. So, it's, in a way, it's like the main body of the Buddha's teaching. Although, from within the Mahayana tradition, particularly the Vajrayana tradition, we can see there's a whole vast array of teachings going beyond that. But still, it's kind of like the bread and butter. This is Buddhism, if you like. All Buddhist traditions, as far as I know, apart from maybe one or two that perhaps shouldn't really claim that name, you know, they all hold this as, you know, this is the core of the Buddha's teaching. So very, very important, extremely important, you know, as Mahayana practitioners, we must not kind of think this is beneath us. You know, this is our bread and butter. So, you know, and Geshe Tashi is, you know, emphasizing there, like, that's so much the heart of his teachings, Four Noble Truths. And so, but particularly the first one, right, because that is again what gets us going. That's what generates the motivation. The more deeply we understand the full meaning of the Buddha's teaching of the truth of suffering, not just the obvious suffering of the lower realms, but the more subtle forms of suffering that we kind of ignore or we don't even think are suffering. Okay. So the third Dalai Lama begins by saying, although by avoiding the 10 negative actions and practicing their opposites, the 10 positive actions, one can attain a special rebirth in the higher realms, one will not pass beyond the frustrations of cyclic existence. For this reason, one must look to the attainment of nirvana or liberation beyond all frustration and pain. What is the nature of the shortcomings of cyclic existence? This is often, you'll come across this phrase, the shortcomings of cyclic existence, shortcomings of samsara, or disadvantages of samsara. Disadvantages of samsara is basically that in samsara you suffer forever. You stay in samsara, kind of, you know, permanent suffering, in a nutshell.
A friend of mine said, I like samsara. He wasn't being negative.
Yeah.
He was assessing where he was. He said, yeah, are my buddies, but I've got to recognise the attractions. It's not all unhappiness.
It's not all unhappiness, no. That's actually not being said.
You know, I mean, I'm not... I think he's got a wrong view, but he was very honest in recognising where he was.
Well, we all have that wrong view. We are attached to it. We recognise it. Yeah, no, that's quite right. I mean, it's quite an insight on his part, yeah.
But he said it to forward himself, not to...
That's the whole point of this. Yeah, that's the whole point of this teaching here, is that we are attached to the causes of suffering. And we, even though we may intellectually accept that they are harmful on a more intuitive level, we're drawn to them and we want, you know, we want things that cause us suffering, and that's the problem, isn't it? That's why we undergo this training in this middle scope, to train our mind to stop wanting things that are causing us suffering. Yeah. So here this section is very much sort of shining a light on the things we'd rather ignore about our present life, the human life. A lot of it is about the suffering of the human realm, and then they talk a little bit about the suffering of God realms as well. But for us, of course, the main thing is recognizing that human life is, it's often said it's in the nature of suffering. So again, it doesn't mean that, you know, there's nothing but suffering. It doesn't mean that there isn't some, you know, some authentic happiness and pleasure that does exist in this human life. But it means that because we turn our backs on it all the time, we don't want to look at it, we don't see how pervasive suffering is in human life. So the Dalai Lama starts talking about the sufferings of the unborn child, and the sufferings of birth itself, and the sufferings of when a child is born, its skin is so sensitive that even though it's been laid on a lovely soft cloth, it feels like it's lying on a bed of thorns, and it's never experienced anything like that before. And there's these bright lights, you know, but somebody comes along and slaps it to get it to breathe. You know, you have to make it cry so that it can breathe. It must be horrendous. You know what I mean? Absolutely horrendous. And they're crying most of the time. They're not crying because the Dalai Lama said, you know, they're not crying because they're happy. And that's what life is like. I remember, you know, sort of, there used to be this expression, your school days are the best days of your life. I want to murder the person who came up with that saying, you know, because it's terrible being at, I mean, I don't know what it's like nowadays, but when I was at you were getting beaten, you know, and not just by the teachers either. It wasn't funny, you know. And you can remember the sort of with rose-tinted spectacles, the nice moments, you remember those. But it was pretty awful. Adolescence, oh God, no, don't go there. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like all these stages of life, if you start thinking about it too much, which is in a way what we're doing here, deliberately, what people would say, thinking too much about the things we don't like to think about life. There's all this suffering. And we try and blank it out. We don't want to think about it. And then going beyond that, you know, it's not just our own lives. I mean, I haven't started on old age, sickness and death. You know?
They do, don't they, at school, you know, they practically say it's all downhill from here.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. You're having a horrible time and they say it's going to get worse from now on.
You're going to be thrown into the adult world.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And then you're going to have kids yourself. Oh my God, God forbid. And then after that, yeah, that's right. And you'll be looking forward to your retirement, and then you start to get old, and and then you die.
Yeah.
So I'm making a joke of it, but the Dalai Lama's not making a joke. You know, especially the present Dalai Lama, actually, really very graphic. Has anybody been reading it, this chapter?
Yes.
I mean, it hits you, doesn't it?
The bit you were just talking about the baby being born.
Yeah.
You know, like the suffering experience.
Yeah.
My daughter Jennifer.
Yeah.
Couldn't have a baby in about 3 weeks.
Oh, right, okay. Sorry, Bob.
I was reading that.
Yeah.
Only yesterday.
Yeah.
Refreshing.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, stay what you are.
Yeah. Well, that's what we all want to do that, but we can't. No. So, yeah.
Change my mind.
Yeah, James might going back in, yeah. We all think like that. But it's too late.
Pressure's on to
Yeah.
and death.
But on the other hand, I was also thinking a new life coming into my family with all the goody stuff I know now. Yes, get a while they're young,
Yeah,
teaching, giving support.
wonderful. Yeah, that's a precious human rebirth, you know. And 99% of the human rebirths are not precious human rebirths. They're coming into this world and they haven't got that. And that's bad news. Look at the world today. We wouldn't want to come into it. But if we have that possibility, then it's different. So very good. Yeah. So really, you know, the message is we need to spend quite a bit of our time in our Dharma practice, in our reading and in our contemplation. So there's this, you know, this sort of rubric of hearing, contemplation, meditation, yeah? So the hearing could be reading, but it's where we get the information, the Dharma information. Oh, this is teaching on suffering. And then, so we think we know about that. We come to teachings to hear the teachings, and then we go for meditate. But there's a bit in the middle, contemplation. Just hearing the teachings once isn't enough. We need to think about it and reflect, use our own mind. Okay, go through our own experience. However unattractive it might seem, but it is very fundamental and important. Really internalize, turn it over in your mind. What's my life been like? What are the lives of the people around me been like? Looking at it. This is the suffering of the human realm. And of course we can overdo it and get sort of drown in gloom. It's not about that, because there is another possibility, you know, there is another side to it. But unless we fully internalize and integrate the extent of the suffering, we don't have the basis to generate the motivation to get out of it, which is what this is all about. It's only when we really fully get it down here. This is a deep truth. It's serious.
It seems like shock therapy in a way.
Kind of.
Like,
yeah.
wake up.
Wake up call. It's a wake up call, yeah.
Baby. Like spiritual babies. It's like, whack.
That's my job here. Whack.
Well, it seems like a form of shock therapy.
Yeah. It is kind of like that.
We have repressions and resistance to the truth.
Yeah.
And they're very powerful, conflicted forces. I know my own mind.
Yeah.
And the only thing that wakes me up sometimes is being very direct with others sometimes, but mostly the other way. I appreciate that. I don't hate that anymore. I don't get upset. I don't take offence. I recognise it as a kind of spiritual karate chop.
Yeah. So, again, I can't compete with the Dalai Lama's eloquence about it. And as I say, he's not sugaring the pill, is he? No. Not sugaring the pill. It's, yep. So we need to, go back and read it again and again and think about it. And it's not, actually, this meditation on suffering it's not actually an unpleasant experience. It's kind of galvanizing, as you say, and a little bit shocking perhaps, but anything that is bringing us into touch with reality, the mind has a positive reaction to it.
It's good at bringing compassion out, isn't it?
Yes.
In your
Oh yes, of course.
You
Totally, yeah.
kind of get the sufferings and I find I'm kinder to people.
Of course you are.
Rather than kind of,
Of
you
course.
think, oh, we're all just struggling, aren't we?
Yeah.
Aren't we up against
Completely.
it? We're doing as best, and
Yeah. Yeah, if you have this realization, and it is a realization of, one of the most important realizations of the path, of recognizing the reality of suffering for what it is, you can't
so
not
much
be compassionate.
that
It's impossible.
people can't see it.
No.
They're trying to fix it with all the wrong actions.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if you can
Yeah.
see that, you think, you don't need me battling with them and all. It's,
Yeah, that's right. That's right. No matter how deluded they are.
yeah.
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 And all the more so, because the more deluded they are, the more they're suffering. So very, very important, Dharma topic. Always, the topics which are connected with generating a spiritual motivation are very, very important. As I've said many, many times, the motivation within Buddhism, the motivation is the pivotal factor. Everything depends on motivation. So here, to generate this motivation of renunciation, without which we cannot generate bodhicitta, okay, we need to meditate on suffering. So you can see how fundamentally important this meditation is. So I think I'm probably going to spend quite a little bit of time on it. So I'll just kind of finish off a little bit this week, just sort of perhaps in more of a summary form. So obviously, to get from the initial scope to the middle scope, we have to focus quite a lot on the sufferings of the upper realms. We should have already got it pretty clearly about the sufferings of the lower realms. They're very easy, very simple. We just need to generate that graphic imagination of what it's actually like in the hell realms, and you think, no, I don't want to go there. Or the hungry ghost realms, or the animal realm. That's easy in a way, but this is more subtle and more kind of wide-ranging, to think about all the different things in our lives, how things that we think are happiness are really suffering in disguise often, so
That's quite a statement.
it is.
Because I picked the wrong friends. I was sick after
Oh, yeah.
domestic violence. But with meditations and therapy, friends were reliable and kind and mutually nurturing. So I don't think these apparently, whether it's people or objects, it was more about my mind than what was out
Of course.
there. And I changed my mind.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's quite right. I didn't first of all, I didn't say that everything in human life is suffering. And secondly, yes, you're quite right. It's not the object, but it is our relationship to the object. It's our attachment to the object. So if we think that happiness is, having a house in the right location with the right kind of car and the right kind of salary level and all of these things, which if you judge by what people put their energies into, suggest that that's what they think is happiness, and then check it out. People who've got all of those things, they ticked all of those boxes, are they happy? Possibly not. Very often they're not at all happy, actually. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with those things, or that there's anything wrong with people having those things, or even with people wanting those things. But if those things become the purpose of your life, then you're in trouble, I think. Because when you've got them, there's still something missing. And then, where do you go from there? So even the things that people... I had a Zen calendar once. It had a very good quote on it. I can't remember all of it, but it was some Zen master who said, I don't know whether what the world considers as happiness is happiness or not. But when I see I can't remember the exact words, but they're sort of see the way that they pursue it with grim determination, you know. And it was very eloquently expressed. But you know, if that what we are sold as what is the pursuit of happiness, you know, the American dream or whatever we call it, you know, and it's not only is the advertising world trying to convince us that that's happiness, but a lot of people buy it.
There's certain recognised poverties, isn't there, when we talk about poverty,
Mhm.
you know, things
Mhm.
like not being able to provide for basic needs.
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
country's level of minimum wage poverty and that, but there's that relative poverty
Yeah.
we're constantly comparing,
Yeah.
you know. And I thought that where I was reading, I forgot where I was reading about this, but I thought that's
Yeah.
really interesting. 'Cause
Oh,
in
yeah.
the Western world, that relative poverty is, you know, I've got
Yes.
a yacht, well that yacht next to me is bigger, and we feel poor.
Yeah.
Madness, innit? Madness.
Yeah, so the people who feel poorest are the billionaires
Yeah.
because they're less rich than the next billionaire.
Yeah, and there's
And
that
that's
level.
terrible.
Apparently, if you can be content at a certain level,
Yeah.
then you're likely to be amongst the happiest. Because as soon as you
Yeah.
start to progress,
And that level is about half the average wage in this country.
Yeah, it's interesting. Isn't it, how you-
Yeah.
There are some happy, wealthy people who
Yeah, oh yeah, there's no contradiction.
mind is different. They know it's not all money and power.
Oh, yeah. It's not the actual wealth, it is the attitude to it. Of course. Yeah. Yes, David.
Now, I'd just written down, it's not the objects,
Yeah.
it's the wanting of them.
Yes. And it's not even wanting, actually.
Well,
Sometimes, you know, because that could be okay, you know, it's like, you know, but up to a point. But it's, and it's quite a subtle distinction. We talk about attachment, which is a technical Buddhist term. It's a bit unfortunate because it is also, you know, it's a technical term in Western psychology. There's a different meaning, so it's a bit confusing. But what we're referring to here is not actually having a desire, because that in itself can be okay. And if you're, you know, if you're thirsty, it's a hot day. It was a hot day this afternoon, and I got a tin of lemonade. It was very nice, and I wanted it, you know. But if my desire for that lemonade was so I was so fixated on that I just was going to be miserable if I didn't have it, you know. It's a compulsive quality of wanting. That is the problem. And, you know, we can sort of recognize it by the fact that it's a quality of desire that is capable of motivating us to do harmful actions. Yeah, so people do unskillful things. They do things that create problems, create suffering, because their desire is excessive. And this is where it comes to the relationship with wisdom, because the underlying reason is because we have invested the object with having that quality from its own side of being desirable, pleasurable in itself, and from its own side. That is what makes us, you know, that is what distorts our attitude and causes us to
So it's an overvaluing
Yes.
of the satisfaction, the enjoyment, the pleasures
yeah.
objects can bring.
Yeah, but it's also misidentifying the cause of that satisfaction. You know, I mean, I drank that lemonade, it's very nice.
The cause of that satisfaction.
But if I think the reason why, the whole cause, as to the total cause of my satisfaction is that can of lemonade, then I'm deceived, because I could drink that lemonade and have a horrible experience if my mind was not, you know, in a good state. So if we think that the object, whether it's the Porsche or the, you know, or the holiday in Spain or whatever, itself has the power to make us happy, it doesn't. So we can get that thing and we can be miserable, and we see it all the time, don't you? You know, people getting what they want, and it doesn't bring them happiness at all often, because of that belief that and it is a disempowering belief, isn't it? It's like, it's actually your own mind. The satisfaction, the joy, the pleasure comes from your own mind, and we can, by essentially by practicing Dharma, what all that Dharma is doing with your mind those things that create genuine happiness. So any time that you experience sort of unalloyed pleasure, if you like, you have a really delightful experience, it's because you've created the karmic potential to have that experience. It's not the object. The object is only the trigger for it. But people believe that the object has an inherent power to create happiness, and that is the road to hell, actually.
I went to Larnaca, I wrote an article, enjoyed myself, and meditated every day. I went a second time to Larnaca the next summer because I expected to.
Yeah.
And the same.
There you go. Good example, yeah. Yep.
I went to Larnaca a third time.
Yeah.
And had a great time because I disattached.
Yeah, there you go. Very good. Thank you. So here we're getting on to the second noble truth. Yeah. So we see the link between those two. So when we go beyond just sort of the obvious sufferings of just physical pain and that kind of thing, and death, to the ways in which we create mental suffering for ourselves, we see more and more clearly into where is that suffering coming from. And of course that renunciation, wanting to be free from suffering, it's not an authentic mind until it is seen in the context of understanding what produces the suffering. We're not looking in the right direction to how to be free from it. So, yeah. So it's these 3 poisons, or these 6 root delusions, or the 20 secondary delusions, or the 84,000 delusions, all the different ways of classifying these mental factors that
only 84,000, there's probably millions.
There may well be. Traditionally, there's an enumeration of 84,000 delusions, and supposedly the Buddha gave 84,000 teachings to counteract them. How much, I don't know whether you can actually find a list or not. It doesn't matter. But the main point is to learn to discriminate between those harmful mental factors. I don't know how many of you had teachings on mental factors. I know you have, because you did FBT. So any state of consciousness, like any moment of consciousness, is kind of made up of a number of elements, and those are the mental factors. So they're things like awareness, intention, concentration, or the emotional states. Compassion is a mental factor, love is a mental factor, fundamental ignorance is a mental factor. All of these different qualities or attributes or states of mind that influence our experience. And among those, there are a certain number that are classified as delusions, or negative or harmful mental factors. All of them are characterized, they all involve this sort of more pervasive factor of ignorance. And this word delusions is usually, the usual translation of the Sanskrit word klesha, But I think a more accurate translation is something like a disturbing conceptual thought. So anger, for example, is a klesha, a disturbing conceptual thought. So we think of it as a feeling, don't we? We tend to think of emotions as feelings. But in terms of Buddhist psychology, they say there's always is a conceptual thought there. So with anger, like we have a judgment about somebody, isn't it? We're angry. We're not just angry full stop. We're angry with a person because of something very specific. Anger battens onto an action or, a word or a facial expression, and says, that's bad. That's not okay, doesn't it? That's what anger does. So it is a thought, and that thought has the function, the capacity to disturb your peace of mind. Your mind becomes agitated in a kind of uncomfortable way. And attachment has the same, although we tend to sort of react more positively to it. It's very obvious you don't really want to be angry. Mind you, it's not that obvious when you are angry. You think, I want to be angry.
I am right.
Yeah. But actually, it's a very, very uncomfortable state of mind, isn't it? Unpleasant state of mind, this anger. And attachment's the same. We think of it as blissful, but it isn't. It's a very uneasy, agitated state of mind, actually. Yeah, being sort of compulsively sort of desire for something. It's very anxious mind. So all of these, these mental factors are these kleshas, they have that function of disturbing our peace, and they also, I think, they kind of cloud your judgment as well. They cloud your judgment and they lead you to do things which are unskillful, which are going to cause more trouble. And underneath all of it is ignorance. Wrong view is the worst, actually. When we see sort of attachment in the form of greed and hatred cause a lot of theamage and destruction in the world. But I don't think anything causes as much as a wrong view. It's, particularly, the most basic form of ignorance, or fundamental ignorance, or it's the opposite of wisdom. The most basic form of it is the self-identification, what's called self-identification, self-grasping mind. And I always think it's not talked about much in the teachings, but there's a form of self-identification where you identify with a group. Okay, so whether it be a religion or a nationality or a political ideology, and it's the same. It's the same factor that Tsongkhapa and the Buddha talk about as self-grasping, but it's a collective self-grasping, and that is incredibly destructive. All wars, more or less, come from that. But there's nothing that people won't do when they're affected by that mind. There's no atrocity that people won't commit under the influence of identifying with a view or a group of people.
Did you know there's a psychology of tribes and war and dehumanizing?
Yeah.
There's a 20-point analysis by professors of psychology, group psychology. It's amazing. They talk about good groups, bad groups, and it's what you're talking about. Maybe.
Yeah. So, it gets to the point that people bring a canister of nerve gas onto a tube train in Tokyo in the name of Buddhism, because they've self-identified with Buddhism.
Similar, we work with offenders, and when we're doing victim awareness stuff, some can be resistant to that because they'll say, well, it's normal, what everyone's doing, it's kind of normal. And especially with online groups,
Yeah.
where people are kind of gravitate towards views they have,
Yeah.
and then others really validate that, and
Yeah.
then they're right. When they come to us, they really think they're right. It's
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah. But I mean, it again, you know, it's not that sort of identifying with a group or belonging to a group and kind of sharing some kind of ideas and values with it is inherently bad. But it is when it becomes, it's kind of like it becomes an absolute. You know, I'm a communist, therefore,
But being part of that group
or whatever
part
is,
of
you
your
know.
identity,
Yeah,
isn't it? So
yeah,
you have to,
yeah.
if someone...
So if you grasp
it's
to
not
that identity,
if you're not quite in line with something
Yeah.
someone else is saying, you have to
Yeah.
accept it, or else you lose
that's
that
right.
bit of your
Yeah.
identity.
If you grasp onto it in a sense of this absolute, this is kind of inherently existent identity, then there's no limit to what it can make you do. If you have a different relationship to it, you know, like we are Sangha, we don't have to grasp to that in a way that therefore anybody who's not Sangha is, you know. No, we don't have to. It's a different thing. So it can be okay to be part of a family or a nation or a tribe or a religion or whatever, you know. But somehow to be able to hold that more lightly rather than to be completely identified with it, you know, so that you lose your own sense of who you are. And that's equally true, of course, of whatever concept of identity you have of yourself. It might not be necessarily linked to a group, but it might be.
When you say completely self-identified with it, do you mean their perception of absolute truth, or ours sometimes?
Yeah, kind of, yeah.
Because that's ideology, you know, it's like...
Ideology is one form of it, yeah, that you identify with a set of ideas and they become, you know, they cannot be questioned because you've pinned your identity onto them in that kind of concrete way. And anything like that you know distorts your judgment and we're all subject to it. We're all victims of this tendency of the mind to grasp onto an inherent identity. I say we all are. Those of us who've realised emptiness have gone beyond that. That's so. Yeah, we're going to continue talking about this topic for a couple of weeks. Well, this is part one, if you like, is the problem, suffering, and the cause of suffering. So it's like this is, you know, it's seen in two related pairs, cause and effect. You have delusions, you know, ignorance, hatred, and greed. Produce suffering, cause and effect pair, and then the other half, the solution, you know, the goal, the destination, if you like, nirvana, freedom from suffering, the path, in other words, the cause that produces that freedom, is the antidote to the delusion, the three higher trainings in it. Moral discipline, concentration and wisdom. So over the next 2 or 3 weeks we're going to be looking at this Hinayana level is another way to talk about it. I think, you know, there's sort of this word Hinayana is a bit controversial because of course the Theravada tradition, Theravada Buddhist tradition, gets labelled as a Hinayana tradition. Technically, actually, it is a Hinayana tradition, but Hinayana is a slightly pejorative term because it means lower vehicle or lesser vehicle. So that's a difficult one there. So they don't like to be called Hinayana, they like to be called Theravada, which they are. But from the Mahayana point of view, it is Hinayana in that, within the Theravada tradition, quite openly and acknowledged, it is this goal of nirvana, freedom from suffering, liberation, the stage of the arhat, that is taught as the goal. Generally, most Theravada teachers don't teach from the point of view of your goal is Buddhahood, your goal is to become Buddha. Because the view, the Theravada philosophical view, is that Shakyamuni Buddha is the only Buddha in this entire world age, the all recorded history and all sort of, future history for perhaps millions of years. There's just been this one Buddha. The Mahayana view, the philosophy is different. And in the Mahayana, it's much more kind of abundant, I think, that there are many, many Buddhas. What was special about Shakyamuni Buddha and the other Buddhas, that the Theravada Buddhist tradition recognizes other Buddhas, but they're very far in the past and far in the future. Within the Mahayana tradition, those figures, those as Kashyapa Buddha and so on, they are seen as enlightened beings who are manifesting in a very particular special way to bring the Dharma into the world. So Shakyamuni Buddha had a very special function as the Buddha who turned the wheel of Dharma, brought the whole Buddhist tradition into existence in this phase of the cosmos, But from the Mahayana point of view, since Shakyamuni Buddha, there have been many, many people who have been fully enlightened. And there are many people alive today who are fully enlightened. So some of our own teachers, perhaps, in my opinion, certainly the Dalai Lama, if anybody's ever been enlightened, it's probably him. But yeah, maybe many. Maybe there's one,
So
on your street.
Suggesting it's quite revolutionary when Shakyamuni Buddha said, he did say in various forms, enlightenment is for all beings. So that I've read passages about that moment, turning the wheel of Dharma. It's quite glorious, transcendental. It's, I would say, revolutionary.
Very revolutionary. Certainly, very revolutionary. But I mean, there is debate between the different schools. Between the Theravada sort of philosophers would say, not all beings attain the state of Buddhahood. Only very, very few ever attain Buddhahood. So they don't have the view of Buddha nature. Actually, they don't have that view. It's exclusively Mahayana. The Mahayana says that even those who become arhats, their path is not finished. They eventually will enter the Bodhisattva path and everyone will become fully enlightened. I like that. I prefer that. It's a personal preference.
Series and various levels below Shakyamuni Buddha, and in the White Lotus Sutra, for instance, there's often these questions, even not quite remonstration, but very honest dialogue. And he says, no, I only said this at this time so you could hear. I only apparently died to wake you up to the trance of being at a highest level of Buddhahood. I found that amazing. That even the partially enlightened, he just constantly, relentlessly taught them in different ways. I found it really marvellous.
So I just wanted to slightly clarify this point about Hinayana and Theravada, actually, because there's some confusion about it. There's a difference between a Hinayana motivation and a Hinayana philosophical view, right? So there may be many people practicing within the Mahayana tradition who, and following the Mahayana philosophy, who actually only have Hinayana motivation. Not that there's anything wrong with that. That's, we should prostrate to them as well. They're anyone who's got that pure Hinayana motivation, renunciation. That's very, very profound. But it's not as high as the Mahayana motivation. So they may be following a Mahayana philosophical view, but they are Hinayana practitioners. And just in the same way in the Theravada tradition, although it has, from the Mahayana perspective, that's a Hinayana philosophical view, And in that philosophical view, it is taught that only very, very few people are capable of following the Bodhisattva path. So they don't emphasize that path. But some Theravada teachers, I have heard Theravada teachers, talking about the Bodhisattva path, they do recognize it. They do say this is possible. If you genuinely have a compassionate motivation to attain Buddhahood. So the fact that someone is a Theravada Buddhist does not necessarily mean they're not a Mahayana practitioner. I think it's quite important to understand that. So, because it protects us from having some sort of sense of discrimination against them, We should really have tremendous respect for people following that tradition and that path. And it's not necessarily the case that they're not bodhisattvas. Just wanted to throw that one in. Right, I think that will do for today. And we'll do a little bit of meditation. Thank you, David. Very nice to see you. See you again. So take a few moments to settle the body into a comfortable, stable position. Relax the limbs. Straighten the back. Check that your base is stable and comfortable. Just take a few moments to let the body and mind settle and relax. And bring your attention inward and focus on the breathing. And we'll just take a little time to reflect on the human condition. We come into the world experiencing suffering. In the text it says that the baby, as it is being born, the pressure on the head feels like being crushed in a vice. The skin is so delicate and sensitive that when it's laid down it feels like being on a bed of thorns. Everything is very confusing. Life is full of discomfort. insecurity, the anguish of being separated from the mother, not knowing what's going to happen to you. Tremendously vulnerable. One experiences a great deal of fear and pain. As we grow up, more painful experiences. If we really reach back in our memories to what it was actually like being a small child, so many things caused us grief. Harsh words were spoken to us, perhaps out of kind intent, but nevertheless cut to the quick. Through adolescence, all of the emotional confusion, kicking against the pricks. The adult world will not allow you to be who you want to be. Going out into the world, experiencing so much frustration as our childhood hopes and dreams are shattered. We begin to experience adult suffering. The pain of broken relationships. Family conflicts. Maybe serious physical suffering, sickness. Those we're close to, our loved ones, begin to disappear. The anguish of losing a loved one, family member, even our animals. Emotional pain can become deeper and more serious as we move into adult life. Divorce, full of suffering. Financial anxiety sometimes drives people to suicide. And all around us we see so many other types of suffering, societal conflicts, racial hatred, prejudice of different kinds, terrible misfortunes that befall people, bankruptcy, violence. Inevitable, incredible increasing arisal of sickness, health problems, old age, the realization we will never again be able to do some of the things we could do when we were young. Death begins to loom ever closer. And beyond, that chasm of death, what then? If we look around us at the contemporary world, the sheer mass of human suffering is totally overwhelming. But it is nothing new. It has been the same throughout history. Even though in general it's said that in the human realm and the other two upper realms there is more happiness than suffering. Yet, when we look suffering in the face, we become aghast. Also, we realize that the relative and temporary solutions that we have tried are completely inadequate to deal with the problem. We need something much more profound, much more powerful. Even the very idea of a solution to the problem of suffering as such is very strange to most people. They never think about it. But if we spend time looking suffering in the face, we cannot help thinking about it. Is there not some way out? And this was the question that the Buddha confronted. "2,500 years ago, he left his royal palace because his whole mind was consumed with an intense desire to find the answer to the problem of suffering. Although many people today would probably think you were mad if you told them that that was your goal in life, to find a way to be free of suffering forever. That was the Buddha's quest. And he found that yes, there is an answer. There is a way to transcend this condition of samsara. of cyclic existence, ever repeating suffering and the cause of suffering. So we should seek to train our minds in this motivation called renunciation, or definite emergence. The intention definitely to emerge, to leave samsara and enter nirvana. Nirvana is not some faraway haven. It is the condition of having eliminated the causes of suffering from the mind. And this is Bosomon. This then must be our training. We should practice until this desire becomes spontaneous and continuous all the time. Whatever we're doing or thinking about, in the back of our minds, my intention, my motivation, my aspiration is to transcend this pervasive suffering that I and all others are subject to. So for this purpose, we will engage in the trainings of the intermediate scope, the middle scope of the Lamrim. Studying, contemplating, and meditating on the Four Noble Truths. So, dedication prayers. Bottom of page 23. Oh, we're doing them in Tibetan. Oh, yes, we're doing them in Tibetan. Chang Chub Sam Chok Rinpoche Ma Ke Panam Ke Gyo Chi Ke Wan Yam Pa Me Pa Yan Gong Ne Gong Du Pa Wa Sho Ke Wa Di Nyo Du Da Lama Sangye Dro Gyo Ne Dro Wa Chi Kang Ma Lu Pa De Yi Sa La Ge Pa Jo. Long Life Prayers, page 34. Dub Zu Changxing Jam Gun Gelwei Tenzin Kepelwei Kunze Dog Porze Jog Sum Kurwei Legman Tudru Padog Sok Du Jagan Du Jab Ten Chong Gang Ri Ra Wei Kar Wei Jing Kam De Pendang Dewa Malu Jum Wei Ne Chen Re Zi Wang Tenzin Gatso Yi Jape Si Te Bardu Ten Gyo Chi. Thank you very much. So we have quite a few Dharma treats coming up. Jamyang's 20th birthday on Saturday. You're all very welcome, 2 o'clock. It's not actually a 20th birthday, but, you know, it was near enough.